Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ, where we unravel the fabric of adaptability in a world that never stops changing. And today, I'm honored to host Dr. Keating, a visionary in the realm of learning and development. And he's invested over 2 decades to shaping the future of education, from his humble beginnings as a high school dropout to becoming an influential doctorate holder from the University of Pennsylvania. His journey is a compelling narrative of resilience and transformation. As a lecturer, an author, an award-winning, the Trusted Learning Advisor book, and BDO Canada's first Chief Learning and Development Officer. So welcome to the show, Keith.
Thank you so much, Ross. It's really a pleasure to be here.
So as we listen into Keith's story, it's not just one of personal triumph, but actually for anyone who's aspiring to turn potential into achievement. His expertise in crafting global, innovative learning strategies and his commitment to talent development make him a pivotal figure in driving workforce transformations. And like many in his position, the role involves advancing with not only agility, but the necessity to anticipate and meet the client's needs ahead of the emerging market demands. With his team, he's driving the firm's agility, adaptability, all topics I know that everyone who listens to this loves, but to enable them to really address the needs of what do tomorrow's clients really need, and what do we need to do to start shaping the sort of future markets that we want. So today he's going to share some of his own insights, his stories, his books in navigating the complexities of this changing world, leveraging learning as a strategic asset. So let's prepare to be inspired and learn some tools to thrive in this era of exponential change. So I'm going to start off with Keith. What is exciting you right now? What's getting you lit up each day?
I'm gonna answer that in just a moment. But what's as I think about how do we navigate this complexity and the velocity of change that's ever increasing, one of my best practices, and the reason I'm thinking about this is I heard you say in your intro, my first thought was, oh, that person sounds interesting. I'd like to meet them. And then my second thought was the way that you positioned it, I started to feel like the weight on my chest. I could feel the anxiety rising. And then I realized my next thought was the only way to survive this sometimes is to not think about it in that totality. When you position it the way that it is, it sounds overwhelming. It's like for my doctoral dissertation, I could have never imagined getting through that. And sometimes when I talk to people about it, the question is, hey, how did you get through that? Or how did you write a book? And the cliche statement is, it was just one sentence at a time. And for me, I can't look at that big picture. I mean, it's in the back of my mind, and I know it's the direction that we're headed in, but I have to just think about what do I have control over? What can I accomplish today? So I just wanted to start with that. But I guess to really answer your question, what excites me or what gets me up every day is just the work that we're doing. I love what I do. I work by choice, 14, 15 hours a day. And I wake up every morning at 5:15, 5:30, and I jump out of bed and I'm excited. And I would say that's only been the last 3 or 4 years of my life. Before then, I was not a morning person. I hated waking up. But once you're able to tap into your passion or align your passion with what you're doing, that's what gets me out of bed every day. So, to answer your question, long story short, is just doing my work. Helping empower, enable, and encourage talent to take control over their future through the power of learning, which is what I've done, which is what I've been successful at for myself. So I want other people to have that.
Do you think it's the work that's changed or your view of the work that's unlocked that shift for you in the last 3 years?
Both. The idea of not being stuck in the order taker mindset has been revolutionary for me. And that's where the Trusted Learning Advisor came in. And, it's a pendulum. It's a journey. It's not a destination. We don't get to a place where it's like, okay, great, I'm a Trusted Learning Advisor and I'm done. We're constantly having to prove ourselves. but forcing myself to write the book, and this is not an intended plug, but forcing myself to write the book made me take a step back and look at the methodologies, the philosophies, and the best practices of what has worked for me. And I actually go through and reread the book. So I just started at BDO and I'm going through rereading it again to make sure I'm applying everything I've talked about. But the answer to your question is it's both my personal mindset and the tool awareness of the tools and how to apply the tools, but also the work. And by that, I mean, at some point, you have to decide how long you might be trying to change the organization that you're in. And you have to determine whether or not you're going to actually be able to make change, because we cannot always change and influence our organizations. And I spent years and years at certain places trying to move that boulder up the hill to finally acknowledge there's someone out there that wants my skill set and wants to actually transform versus me trying to convince my current environment that they need to transform.
It's interesting, isn't it? This dichotomy we live in between self-control, self-awareness, self-understanding, self-discovery, and then helping others to find their own paths in the same way, right? And laying a fertile environment for ourselves with our own self-story, and then providing, you mentioned, reading our own book, taking our own medicine, and to distill into a book is a great experience, a great learning experience. And then to read it and practice it, that's part of the craft. That's part of the work, part of the ongoing work in progress that we all are. What was the turning point that went from Keith not having a book to Keith having a book? What were some of those triggers for you?
I pause because I'm trying to answer in a way that doesn't sound egotistical.
Say it how it is.
It needed to be written.
Yeah.
I didn't, and I've read a lot of books out there, and there were different books that touched on it, but I didn't see anything that explained at least my journey or my path in what I thought was helping me evolve from being an order taker. And so I think, there's so many influences along the way from management consulting books. And that's, I started in that field, 20 some years ago. And that's been the underpinning of the way that I've always operated, is with that consultant mindset. It just happens to be L&D that is the body of work that I'm experienced in. And so the two of those are really what created the Trusted Learning Advisor. And I just think back to all the many influences along the way. But the short answer is, I just didn't see anything out there that was giving this type of guidance for me. And so I just thought about all the experience that I've pulled from other practitioners in my network as well, kind of combined all of our stories and what's worked for us and put it in a way that I hope comes across as practical, accessible, and applicable. I didn't just want kind of a thought leadership of theory, because there's lots of theories out there, but I wanted something that people could read and on each page be like, okay, I can apply this. I can take this back and try it out. Maybe it doesn't work in our organization, but it's still a tool that they can try.
It's often, I speak to a lot of authors and they talk about this challenge of, oh, I don't want it to be ego. And actually, it's what I found is the exact opposite. It's one of service to be able to say, here, I want to share something to help you in your journey. Here's my journey. This is what I've distilled. And that's evolution through generations, right? We listen, we apply, we evolve, we understand, we see what's shifted, and then we try to lay it better for the next. And so you mentioned about this language, you said order taker, order taker or something. Tell me a little bit more. What does that actually mean to you, Keith? And what were some of those transitions from an order taker to, an advisor, or how else you might shape that narrative for us?
One thing that you said before we started recording was you used the phrase knowledge philanthropy, which I loved. I'm going to borrow that. But you're right. That was a big purpose of the book, was the knowledge philanthropy, because anybody who's written a book knows you don't make money from writing a book. I gave
bloody hard work. Right?
I gave up 90% of ownership to get it published. So it's really a volunteer effort to get that knowledge out there, although people paying for it might not feel the same way. I do apologize in advance for the price tag. I had no control over it. But so knowledge philanthropy, I love that. Um, Order taker to me is, well, let me preface. I grew up as an order taker. So my father was in the military. And so from very early on, it was you don't speak unless you're spoken to, you take orders and you execute. And that was my mindset growing up. And so when I joined the industry, to be treated that way felt normal to me. It's like, okay, you tell me what to do and I'm going to execute it. It wasn't until about 10 years in to my job before it became a career and a passion and a calling that I realized, well, I have a point of view. Like I've done this now for 10 years, and what you're asking or telling me to do, that's actually not the right way. There's a different way to do it, and you're going to get better results that way. And so then I started trying to talk and consult with them. And that's when I realized, oh, they're not open to this. They don't want to hear what I have to say. They just want to tell me, create that 30-minute web-based training or create that 2-hour sales training that's going to revolutionize our business. I'm like, well, is that the problem we're even trying to solve? Like, how do we know it's actually going to change anything? But okay, I'll do it. So that's when I learned there's got to be a different way to talk to our stakeholders and our business partners and have them see us differently. But it took me years and years and years to craft those skills. And they're still not perfected. You know, it is still my influence skills, my negotiation skills. They, they're definitely a work in progress. It's my least favorite activity as part of being a trusted learning advisor, but it is part of what we need to do is convince them of the value and the credibility that we can provide to delivering the right solutions. So I would say, you know, the year 10 mark to about the year 15, 16 mark was more of the awareness, the aha of, oh my gosh, this is actually miserable because now I have this experience and I want to get it out and I want people to listen and I have value. And for me as a human, I never felt like I had much value growing up and even, you know, early on in the job. And so now I'm feeling like, okay, I have something, I have experience and value, but now you don't want to listen. So then it feels like the world is kind of compressing you and you're then kept in this box and you begin to get burnt out and you shut down. And then it's like, well, why do I want to fight you if what you're telling me to do is not the right thing, but you don't want to listen? Fine, I need a job. So I'm just going to do that and it's going to fail. And then it's this cycle. And it's a cycle of L&D, we don't see any value from you. You're not really changing the business. You know, we hate your learning. Well, it's because when we try to bring forth solutions, you don't want to listen. You want us to be order takers until you don't. And by then it's too late because we've executed your order. It's failed. It cost money, time, and resources. And now you're upset at us, even though we didn't really do it. So it's just this perpetual cycle. And it wasn't really until about my 15th to 17th year that I started to apply and just think about the different skill sets and the consulting mindset and being able to position ourselves in a manner that our stakeholders would finally listen to us. And one of the things, the aha moments for me was so often we're trying to get a seat at somebody else's table. And I hear this all the time from L&D, you know, if I could just get in the room, if I could just have a seat at their table, I could then tell them like why we're so great and what the strategy is and how we should be working. And now I'm saying be bigger than that. Think more aspirationally. Instead of trying to sit at somebody else's table, build your own table and invite them to come and sit with you. That way you control the narrative. You're the facilitator, the orchestrator, the conductor, the puppeteer. You control the guest list. You control the agenda topics. It's your meeting. And for me, once I was able to flip that mindset, there's a bunch of examples in the book. You know, a quick one, like, you know, we created the Innovation Garage at one of the companies. We started creating internal learning conferences where we leveraged our stakeholders to actually be the speakers and we supported them, but it became about positioning our stakeholder as the hero of their own story. And I think so often we think of ourselves as combative or not really aligned, and we need to be symbiotic. And it needs to be less about L&D trying to make a name for ourselves and show how great we are. If we just support our stakeholder, help them be successful in their job, through osmosis, we become successful as well because they're out there explaining what happened and who's supporting them, and it's us supporting them. So long story short, it's a journey, not a destination, and stop trying to get a seat at somebody else's table, build your own table, and invite your stakeholders to sit with you.
I love that concept and thought of, not their table, your party, your rules. And I think that comes from this sense of giving self permission, permission to think and permission to dream. And we start off with that as children. And then, stuff comes along. And for a lot of that in work was management, management for productivity, where we were certain about what we were facing. It was probably similar to what we faced yesterday with a few minor tweaks. So when you first started and understood, what made that shift for you? And you said, oh, both. It was my mindset and the work. I wonder if now is the perfect similar storm to both the mindset and the work for learning and development, to be able to have both the permission themselves to say it's our table, but also the environment to need another table at the same time. So I think there's this unique opportunity we've got where, yes, we talk about change and the vastness of it. And you said, can be overwhelming. Let's start with what we can see. What can we control? So when everybody's in this turmoil and we're in storm, those who have the ability to sail well in stormy seas, to say, no, this is the table. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to shift. I think that holds great strength. And at the same time, to not try to say, I've got all the answers. We're going to figure it out and we're going to give it the best crack and have this vulnerable experimental mindset rather no, this is the order, need to do it, and then blame you if it doesn't go right. So I think a lot of it in this setup, we've got this opportunity to reimagine the playbook, perhaps. And that's maybe what you're talking about here, of those steps. So if people are in a similar stage to where you might have been several years ago, that they see it around them, they haven't perhaps got the self-confidence, environment, whatever it might be, to say, no, this is my table. What did you do, and what might they be able to do to start chipping away at that shift within their organization?
I'm smiling hard because let's see if I can find the page real quick, but I'm almost certain that one of the last things that I said in here was, if you haven't received the permission yet, think of this book as your permission to start to think differently. Anyway, I know it's in here somewhere. And so that's a really great point. And so to me, that was also another intention for the book, was to give the permission, because no one ever gave me that permission. And I think that's kind of the direction you're headed in here with the question. And it was, first of all, trying to give myself that permission. And the permission started to formulate for me when I had the credibility and when I had the experience to back it up. I think one of the challenges right now is this industry is very inclusive. Anybody can say they're part of L&D. And we don't have a system in place that measures credibility. You don't have to have certain degrees, you don't have to have certifications. Now, that worked in my favor and for thousands of other people, because I was able to just quickly jump in. And I full-heartedly admit I was one of those people who didn't have the experience, but said I did because I wanted to get in the industry. I ended up doing much more damage at the beginning for at least 10 years because I didn't understand that there was a science behind what we do. There's a science behind learning and development. I didn't learn that for at least 15 years. And so the question is, for those who are not feeling credible or not feeling confident enough yet to build their own table, work on your credibility. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. One, if you don't understand that there is a science to learning, you need to understand this. So one book that I highly, highly recommend is called Make It Stick: The Science of Successful Learning. It should be required reading for every single person who calls themselves an L&D practitioner, because it breaks down the 5 components of the science of learning. The second book, of course, should be The Trusted Learning Advisor. But I start first with Make It Stick: The Science of Successful Learning. And I have no relationship with the book. But you have to be credible. When we put ourselves in these situations, we want our stakeholders to trust us. And part of building trust is to have credibility. Now, you're not going to start from day one from having that credibility. But what you can do is you can understand the industry, you can understand the nuances, you can understand the science of learning, you can do research. World Economic Forum, McKinsey Global Institute. Those are two free research firms who put out research constantly about learning and development. Take time to use those firms and look at your industry, look at your service lines, look at the roles within those service lines, and start to figure out what skills are going to be irrelevant essentially in the next 5 years, what skills are going to be growing, and start to really absorb that data, because part of being an L&D practitioner means that you understand this. You understand what roles are at risk, what roles aren't at risk, where you may need to be focusing from a skills development perspective. Now, with that, let me clarify, you do not have to be a know-it-all. We have to be learn-it-alls. And there's a massive difference there. We don't live in an age anymore where you have to memorize everything. I don't know much, and that's fine. And I have no problem saying that. I don't think that I'm particularly that smart. What I have is the ability to use tools and resources to help me learn at that moment of need when I need to learn something. If you ask me about any of the presidents of the United States or anything about history, or, I have no idea. I don't know. I didn't want to learn that when I was younger, and thank goodness I didn't force myself, and I got the drop out of high school and I still became successful, because now we're not a memorization society. We're how can I use these tools and resources to get me the answer that I need? And so I share that because it can be overwhelming in learning and development. So you need to know the science of learning. You need to have the biggest toolkit possible. You need to understand the difference between AR, MR, VR, when would you use one over the other? What's the difference between an LXP and an LMS? What's the difference between degree, learn upon, cornerstone, success factors? You don't have to be experts in all of them, but you need to be able to know where to go and get that data to understand and give your point of view to your stakeholders. So in summary, you need to build your credibility and build your experience and your expertise. If you're early in your career, you can do that by understanding research, by understanding learning methodologies, understanding the science of learning, so that you can start to develop your own point of view in the conversation.
And a lot of it, Elon Musk talks a lot about first principles. And this, in effect, is what you're talking about. Get the principles of learning. And then, retail shifted to just in time, in many different areas, rather than holding stock, weighted stock that then might become redundant and has to, end up in deserts on fire. Skills can be just in time too, right? If we know the right who, where to look, the right tools and the principles, then we can apply it. I think that one of the challenges I certainly see and find is just the volume of tools, right? And we can suffer a lot from toolitis. I talk about it in my training, right? Oh, we've got a new tool. Great. I've got toolitis because I haven't used it for a while. Well, we need to know the principles of which tool and when. What is noise? What is signal? And a lot of this, I feel, comes down to how do humans interact with each other, and how are we interacting in the future with software and team members that might not be human. So one of the things I'm interested to try and explore a little bit with you is when, Keith and I were going on a sprint, right, what is it? What's the problem? What's the challenge? What are we trying to solve? What tools do we have? Who do we need? Right, 3 or 4 people, in we go. We'll spend a few hours to do that. What if now somebody coming into that is an avatar, is an AI, is a other form of intelligence? How do we as humans interact with that? How are we not biased to or from, or all of the different challenges that come from those things? Because I foresee that already being brought in, that they're inert, they're naive until we ask it, till we give it some permission to do things. And how can we navigate some of those transitions as AI starts to go from increase our productivity, help with efficiency, to then thinking about, am I making that decision? Or is the data making the decision? Or is it because it was the answer that AI told me? How do you foresee that next few years of that transition in your view, Keith?
it starts with at least understanding what is available. And so it sounds maybe remedial to answer this way, but it starts first with just understanding the tools itself. We're not in a place right now where we can say, generally speaking, everyone's comfortable with AI or Gen AI. I think a lot of our industry, learning and development, talent
Will
development,
we ever
HR,
be? I don't know if we'll
right.
ever be, right? Always. Yeah.
But to even get comfortable with it, I don't think that we're there. So I still see a number of people in my network on LinkedIn and such who aren't really using it day to day. Gen AI, Chat GPT, Gamma, Copilot, those are the first three tabs on whatever browser I'm on. And they're the first place that I go to. So, your question is, how do we start to incorporate this? It starts with just trying it yourself, whether it's on a personal basis, whether for me, it's the first place I go. So, Chat GPT is called G, and that's just the name I've given it to shorten it. But whether it's my relationship, I'm always telling my partner, oh, you won't guess what G can do
What
now.
G
What I
says.
learned
Yeah.
at work, it's the same thing. Like people respond, be like, hey, who wrote that? I'm like, G.
Yeah.
Like G is now a person or a part of my life and my
I
existence.
have to share
So
the name quickly with you, Keith. We were at our in-person summit in Mexico in October, and I was running a session on using ChatGPT. And one lady, she was fearful with it, and by the end of it, she said, "It's my best friend now. I call it Chatty." And Chatty. So G and Chatty. Yeah, yeah, Chatty.
Yeah, everyone should absolutely be using it just to understand it. Yes, there's the question about the data and all this other stuff. So you don't put in your personal data, don't put in your business data until you're comfortable with the environment and whatnot, but just try and break it. And I'm encouraging my teams to do the same thing. And so I've given every person on my team, they have one specific tool that they have to go and try out and just get familiar with it and come back and teach us and tell us, hey, is this something that might help us improve our productivity and work better together? So I'm not sure that I'm answering your question other than to say, I think it starts just by getting comfortable and familiar
Yeah.
with
It
it.
reminds me back at school, right, where you're given a pen and you go on the walls, you go on the table, you go on the paper, you go everywhere and you're trying it out. And, you figure out different things. And then there's often the forgotten part, which is the show and tell. And you just mentioned it at the end there, right? When we're going off and we're exploring, we're finding, from yes, oh, it makes a great story for the grandkids, or it does a recipe, or it does this, to then, how can I solve this particular challenge that I've got right now of this particular conflict, this issue, this opportunity, this danger, this project I'm working on, and starts to evolve. And then we show and tell. And we show and tell just as much what didn't work as what did work, so that we can get glimmers and opportunities from each other. And I'm fascinated. I'm in a couple of really active WhatsApp groups with people around the world around AI and what's going on. And every time, here's a Gemini's just done 1.5, and here's where they've put in a 44-minute video of it, and you can ask it questions and say, where's this? And show a little drawing. I don't know if you've seen it of, it's like a cylinder, 3 legs, a faucet with some water out of it. Put that in and say, show me where this is. And it timestamps it in the film of where that particular part is. So the element of multimodality is amazing. It says, tell me when the paper was picked out of the person's pocket. And here it was. It then read what the paper was that was stolen out of that person's pocket and where. So I imagine this, what was in old school, go to the library, put the thing in, try and find where it is, where's the book, go and find it, to now Google, to being able to just have conversations with some of that knowledge, and it just give me the answer and the reference point and where is it, where was I with Keith in that conversation where he spoke about this, about permission, or about this piece, and I just ask it and it gives me the little clip. And so I can have conversations with past conversations. And I think that's a unique learning experience that we can unlock, is continually refining and allowing us. One of the components that we measure that I'm interested, given a lot of your research in adult learning theory, is around unlearning. And where we've spent so long on repeating stuff, right? We've increased the myelin sheath around the neural net, and we go, yeah, I know what that is every time. I just need to hear it, need to see it, just need a glimmer of it, and I'm there. When those things are no longer serving us, and what was a springboard has now become a ball and chain, a method of how we did something, a belief of how we did something, a process. How might we help ourselves to unlearn some of those old successes that have held are now potentially holding us back? Have you come across that in your own career, past things that have been successful that you've had to let go of, an old identity, an old thought? How did you do it? And are you seeing that within BDO, within the work that you're doing, where you're having to unlearn past things that were successful that are no longer serving you?
I think the fundamental ideology behind that is growth mindset. I think, growth mindset encompasses all of that. So I love the phrase unlearning. There's this quote that was attributed to Alvin Toffler, but he never said it. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who can't read or write. It's those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn, which again, he never said that. It was attributed in different areas, but he didn't say it. Anyway, and I've been a fan of using that phrase, and I've been called out a few times because there are people who will say, well, can you truly, truly unlearn something? So for those who don't like the phrase unlearn, because you're like, oh, you can't actually unlearn because you're going to remember it. Fine. It's thinking differently. It's growing. It's changing your mindset. It's agility, adaptability, resilience, all of those kind of rolled up into one. And I think that the more you can unlearn, or the more that you have growth mindset, you're creating the skills that we need in organizations. It's the skills for the future. The most important thing, if I could teach organizations or humans just one thing, it would be adaptability, agility, whichever of those you prefer.
Yep.
And that's what unlearning really means, is that you're being able to let go of that mindset, of that belief, and recognize that it can evolve, it can change, and then you can go on to that next level, that next growth pattern. And so one of the things that we're really focusing on at BDO is helping build and strengthen that skill set of agility, adaptability, resilience, growth mindset.
It's interesting. I spent a lot of time with Barry O'Reilly. He wrote the book called Unlearn, and
Yep, I know, Barry.
it's interesting, isn't it? Where when something is no longer working, it's no longer working. It's easier to say, okay, I'll think differently. I'll do something. I used to, this is how I got an applause. This is how I got a check at the end of the month, because I was this person. I provided this value to the world. This was part of my identity. When it doesn't, it might be painful, but we see that continuing to do it isn't working. What's tricky is when it's still working just a little bit, or maybe 1 in 2, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 1 in 10, just a little bit that keeps you sneaky to say, hey, Keith, no, I'm still here. I still will work by doing it that way. I'll still get the message across in a fax. I'll still get the message across in this way, or whatever it might be. And I think organizations that, as you mentioned, this adaptability, the speed of learning, the ability to, for Kodak, it wasn't not being innovative enough. It was because what they had was so good. It's hard to let go of something that's so good. When you have film processing, when you're Nokia and you're at this position, when,
Your blockbuster.
yeah, your Blockbuster, when, countless people that have held a position of too confident because there's too much applause that then gets circumvented by something. And I think previously that's been multi-generational circumventing, and the disruption points have been over a longer period. Now it's concertinaing, and it's concertinaing where those disruption points are becoming more frequent and in more areas, and it corrodes confidence. Where previously we said, oh, Keith, so tell me, how much experience have you got? And we equated experience with a prediction of your future performance. Oh, you've done 10 years. Oh, so you must be good. Or you've done 15, or I'm there. When the future performance bears no relevance to some of the back, I can speak to somebody who's been in business for 20 years, but it's just 1 year repeated 20 times versus 20 years worth of experience and principles thinking, and can they adapt? Can they relearn? You mentioned about adaptability, about resilience. What are some of the things that you're implementing, that you're interested in right now? And at the same point, what are you fearful of? What is something that is keeping you awake as well? So what are you working on? What's keeping you awake?
In terms of working on, I think related to this context is futures literacy. And it's a skill that I would encourage everybody to look into. It's not really been formalized yet. UNESCO has some frameworks around what futures literacy means, but said in another way, it's anticipatory planning. And it's one of the programs that we're going to be launching at BDO because we want everyone in the organization to be able to work with our clients to help them see around the corner. You know, this phrase, workforce futurist, and I call myself one, and you know, it's popping up all over. Well, none of us have a crystal ball. And if we did, we'd be playing the lottery and we'd all be retired. So a workforce futurist is just someone who is taking past data and looking at trends and analysis for the near future and anticipating potential outcomes. And that's all workforce futurists is and what that means. And so rather than being surprised by the potential future, let's anticipate it. I don't know why I can't say that word. And let's predict and plan for the possible outcomes so that when it does happen, we know how to react. So short answer is anticipatory planning or futures literacy is one thing that we're working on this area. In terms of what
does that look like in reality? So, you know, I went to Singularity University. There had a guy there who was talking about, you know, there are only 4 futures or 4 or 5 futures from a futures theory basis. How do we then look at the cascading effects to, you know, skate to where the puck's going by looking at these various indicators? What does that look like on a practical, you know, week to week, month to month basis? Is that getting people in a room and looking at doing, okay, we're going to do a futures wheel activity. We're going to look at, you know, second, third impact consequences. We're going to expose them to exponential technologies so they're better able to see where the lily pads of exponential change are in the pockets around the world. What does it really look like from a practical sense of expanding horizons to different mindset theoretical work to applying to the challenges that they've got? Walk me through a couple of those things that are going on.
Sure. I would say just off the top of my head, there's 3 points I would focus on. One, external data and research. So again, going to firms like World Economic Forum, McKinsey Global Institute, pulling in that data to look at what do they think from an anticipatory planning perspective is going to be happening in the next 5 years. Then I would be pulling in my clients and we would be doing brainstorm discussions with them. We would be doing the futures wheel, pulling in all those activities because they're, you know, quote, the experts, at least in their industry or their organization. Then I would recreate that internally without the client in terms of what do we see and what might be holding them back from being able to truly see around the curve. For example, you know, you brought up Kodak. So yes, they were the ones that created the digital camera. They're also the ones that killed it. So having a discussion with them would have only been focusing on the future of film. They wouldn't have thought about the future of the camera. And the same with Blockbuster. So it's important to have the activity both with the client to get their knowledge, but also without the client so that you can have an unbiased approach. And one of the things I love to do is bring in people who have no awareness of that industry, that client, and get those outside perspectives so that they don't have the list of the 100 reasons of why it will never work. And that's where the true brainstorming and I think really the critical thinking comes through is when you bring in those outside perspectives.
The beauty of the naive mind, right? Get some kids involved, get some naive minds, get
Absolutely.
some people who know nothing about it to ask the silly questions and dream the silly dreams of those things.
And that's, you know, some people really dislike, you know, people like Elon Musk. Well, you know, he's a visionary. Whether you like him personally or not, he dreams big. And people told him for years there was no way it was going to be possible. But without dreaming big, we can't envision the future. And that's really, when we think about futures thinking, it's
Yeah.
how big can we go? And yeah, maybe the reality of it is much smaller than that, but that's how the future is created.
And you talk about him. I mean, the Falcon 9, the most, you know, viable, financially valuable way of getting stuff into space. And yet he had a realization recently that said, this isn't going to do what I need it to do. And so is going to be closing it as, the most, profitable piece, various things, because it's not going to get into Mars. And, to drive the next part, what are you willing to close down? I mean, that takes incredible bravery to do. And most
But it's also,
organizations
I
would
think,
never do that, would they? It doesn't make sense to the rational mind to do something like that until it pitters out. Surely we
yeah.
can extend the core long enough and do this other thing. But the reality is, for those at the pioneering edge, can you operate truly in duality? Can you really have that paradox of being able to do it? Or do you need these skunk works? Do you need it to happen in secrecy? Because the immune system, the governance of the core will squash it. And so I think that is, the innovator's dilemma, the challenge that's there. Does that exist the same in your world of learning? Is trying to get people to live in those senses of how do we extend the core whilst also going for what's at the next evolution, the next opportunity. What's your thought around that?
Yeah, it goes back to something we were talking about earlier with this concept of permission. I think to the Elon Musk's of the world, he never asked for permission. He didn't need somebody else to create that space for him to think bigger, broader, outside of the box. And I think L&D has got to get to that point where we're just not sitting by waiting for permission from stakeholders or from someone in the organization. It's where we're building, again, our own table, inviting others to sit with us to hear our narrative, to hear our futures thinking and our planning. So again, for those listening, if you need permission, here's your permission, go and do it.
If we don't do this, what's the worst case? If we don't
There
invest
is
in this, if we don't do it, what does it look like?
AI is the best order taker we could ever have. So if we are going to continue to exist as order takers and not value creators, then AI will absolutely take our jobs. And I don't mean that it's not a threat per se, but it's, if you think about, as we classify ourselves as order takers, we now have the best order taker that we could have ever imagined. It's better than us as order takers. So why would our stakeholders still come to us to take their order when they could actually go right to ChatGPT, say, hey, here's the background, the context, create me a 2-day ILT training, give me all the content, let me export it into Gamma, here's the slides, let me put it in Synthesia, whatever, I can't pronounce it correctly. And then let's have some talking heads come out with AI, and boom, in 45 seconds, maybe, I don't know, 2 to 3 minutes, I have a full training program, and I didn't have to contact anybody in L&D.
Yep.
Is it better than us? No. But is it good? Yeah, sometimes good is good enough for our stakeholders who don't want to hear, oh, we need a needs analysis. This is going to take us 18 months to create. We need $500,000. I need 37 stakeholders. I need 15 SMEs. And we're like this resistance, and they're like, just get it done. And now they have somebody who, or something rather, who can just get it done.
Yeah.
So we have to evolve to being trusted learning advisors, which means strategic business partners embedded in the business, who understand the business, who are proactive, not reactive, who are forward thinking, who are looking at like systems thinking holistically across the organization. We're not just training. We're not just learning and development. We are business partners who are helping our stakeholders be the hero of their own story. So that means that sometimes I'm doing things that don't really have anything to do with L&D. I'm a networker. I'm building relationships. I'm looking for problems. I'm trying to close those gaps. If there's one thing that we want every person in our organizations to do, it's to be able to fill the next organizational gap, whatever it is. Because the truth is, we don't know. So the way that change is happening, the way that technology is influencing us, the world is influencing us, our businesses are changing all the time. So I just want every person in the organization to be able to adapt along with those changes and close those gaps. And for L&D, if we don't evolve, we're just not as necessary anymore.
No. And, with the launch of Sora and how that's going to evolve from a year ago, I don't know if you've seen the videos that have been circulating again of, text to video, which was a Will Smith eating spaghetti mashup from a year ago to now some of the stuff that is in Sora. Just think another 6 months, another year of how we can just have conversations to create cinema level videos. So we go from I want to learn how to cook and let me get Gordon Ramsay on masterclass, or I want this, or I want these things. What is unique to me? What is it that I want? How do I evolve in all of those things before we can matrix plug in, right? And then just get the download piece, which I think is a very, real reality, of some of these things. When you look at another, Elon Musk, Neuralink, they've now just done the first one into a human for telepathic work. We've got Mary Lou Jepson's work that's going on with open water to be able to wear a cap like a beanie cap and see many orders of magnitude more clearly the brain and how it's functioning than an MRI scanner with home level kit. And so I think the unlocking that we have over the coming years and decades is hard to fathom. And so we can come full circle as we come to a close, Keith. It can feel overwhelming. It can feel, wow, who am I in this world? Who do I want to be? From a husband to a wife, to a father, to a son, to a colleague, to what am I doing that leaves something I want to be left for the next generation? How do I prepare them to help them navigate to smiles, happy places, not sharp objects and dark rooms of these things? And I think for me, I see a yearning personally for a human connection of in-person things. I've gone from, running an office with people in the same location to now being fully remote. And I yearn to be in the same physical space as other human beings, to feel connected, to have elements of spiritual learning and an experience that is learning where I can hold, touch, hug, see, breathe, feel the energy of another human. And so I think the opportunity that it can give us is freedom to do more of that. So if we take care of all of the other stuff that's dangerous, dirty, disgusting, that is, we don't like doing, so we can hang out more. That's the kind of world I'd like to live in, where we're learning by hanging out together, being in person. And I wonder if you're seeing or hearing in your worlds and your areas of this resurgence of wanting to be in the same physical spaces together. I know there's a lot of conflict about return to office mandates and all of these things, but for me, just being around other humans is part of what life is. And hopefully ones that I choose to be around, that uplift me, that challenge me, that think differently to me. And as we come to the closing part of it, Keith, what's your feeling about the experience of being in person versus all of this digital stuff, sticking your Apple Pro, augmented reality lenses on? Where do you see the shifts, and where would you like it to evolve to, Keith?
I think the pendulum has swung back. So it was all the way to the left in terms of digital and asynchronous. And I think we're seeing it now flip to the other side, where we want synchronous cohort-based learning opportunities. And there's so much value that can't be ignored with that. Besides the human connection piece that you've talked about, it's also the context, the contextualized learning experience, the relevance. How can I apply this as I learn? How can I ask questions? How can I learn with my colleagues so that we can talk about how we might go back and apply this, which is also linking us together and building relationships as humans. So the answer to your question is, I think we're going to see much, much more of the need for cohort synchronous learning experiences that just simply can't be replaced.
And why would we want to? Some things because we can, should we? It's the Jurassic Park quote, right? Just because we can, we forgot to think whether we should. As we come to a close, one of the questions I ask at the end to all guests is around curiosity. and it's a two-parter. It's, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
Wrote a book. That was the first time.
Great. Very good. And give me just a little experience of, we talked earlier about, it needed to be done. It was a service. What did that actually feel like? The process of that for you? What was your lived experience of that?
Painful. It was very hard. I wish that I was an author or a writer at heart, but to me, I'm such a self-critic that every single word had to be written, rewritten, to a point where I just had to stop and kind of work through that and then just write. And it was, yeah, it was just a very difficult, laborious process, but also an act of love, because I wanted to share this experience and the knowledge, as you said, knowledge philanthropy. So in the end, it was absolutely worth it, but it was definitely a very challenging experience.
Yeah, I think I first heard, I don't know where it came from, but through Marshall Goldsmith, talks a lot about knowledge philanthropy, and the MG 100 talk about that. And coming from a family where both my parents were teachers, it's been a big part of my life. Is, you know, we we serve in many different ways, and a life well lived is one in thirds: earn, learn, and serve. And so as we're going through each day, what are we? Are we earning? Are we learning? Or are we serving? And we just dance in between those things, which is beautiful. I want to thank you deeply for our conversation. For those who've listened in, you might notice a slight difference in my voice. I'm just coming off the back of a few days in bed suffering from cold or perhaps even COVID, but it's not been joyful. I have loved every moment, Keith. It's been really fascinating to hear your thoughts. I'm going to dive even more into your book, some of your work. And if people want to get your book, reach out to you, what are the best ways to get in touch with you, Keith?
LinkedIn would be a great way to connect, and then order the book on your favorite book site. I don't want to promote anybody in particular, but it's available all around the world on any book site.
Fantastic. We'll get some links out there. It's been a real pleasure.
So,
Thank you
thanks so
very
much,
much.
Russ.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams, and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review, and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.